be the Wild West of business. But we're talking about creating a level of certainty that these businesses can plan and they can begin to know what they can do and take a deep breath and create jobs.
I want to share something that I posted on Facebook last week, and it was an article, many of you may have seen it, but it was in the Washington Post last Wednesday. This is what I wrote. If you've ever wondered just how ridiculous federal regulations can be, just ask Marty the magician. This front-page Washington Post article tells the story about how USDA regulators required a children's magician to license his trick rabbit and even compile an animal disaster plan to comply with the federal mandates. It's a lighthearted tale, but the rabbit trail of regulations Marty was forced to navigate illustrates a lesson in one of Washington's bad old habits, the tendency to pile new rules on top of old ones, with officials using good intentions and vague laws to expand the outreach of the total bureaucracy. If you hadn't seen that, I strongly encourage you to get online and find a copy of it. It is a funny story, but it's really sad at the same time because it shows and highlights exactly what you're talking about for a guy that just wants to pull a rabbit out of a hat for some kids at a birthday party.
I've talked to countless individuals, business owners, people who wanted to start a business that talk about what it took for them to get started. Some of them maxed out every credit card that they had. They applied for more credit cards just so they could max out to try to get the business off the ground. Others are looking at it saying, you know, I've got some great ideas where we could grow, we could expand, or I could even start my own business, but I can't do that because we don't have the ability or the means to do that. But to your point about the USDA requiring a license of somebody's rabbit, the Wall Street Journal recently talked about a Competitive Enterprise Institute study estimating that federal regulations cost over $1.8 trillion. Now that's nearly $15,000 for every American household. $15,000 before you can start your business, before you do anything else, that's already built into the cost of doing business. That's already part of the factor you have to overcome, the regulations. $1.8 trillion, it's about the same size as Canada's GDP, the gross domestic product of Canada. We are regulating this country to the size of Canada's gross domestic product. And yet we're hoping to solve our unemployment problem by getting people to put it all on the line and risk their houses, their lives, to go out and start something, to go out and take a risk, and yet we have regulations $15,000 every household. How can we expect this economy to recover when we have the uncertainty, whether it's the President's health care bill, whether it's uncertainty over energy regulations, coal ash bills that we'll be dealing with this week, or indeed licensing a rabbit at USDA?
I understand that, and look, as we go forward, you know, you hear the rhetoric a lot, right? I mean, the House of Representatives is filled with rhetoric, right? It's probably been like that since the day it was built and the day it was created. Some of the rhetoric I've heard is that our party only cares about big business, that we only care about the 1%. Recently we talked about taking food from the mouths of children, right? We heard about that. Any sane, reasonable person knows that's not the case. Any sane, reasonable person knows, look, both sides of the aisle are very passionate about the future of their country. They want success. I think it's okay to have a conversation about how we get there. I believe that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle want their country to be successful. I think if we can hear that they also agree that we want our country to be successful and we can have this conversation, this is so helpful. Now let me ask, in that vein, in having a fair and honest debate about this, let's see what the President's plans are. I mean, we hear constantly more and more stimulus spending. Do you realize that the last stimulus bill that was really passed at midnight, basically, with a lot of Christmas tree ornaments for everybody to get yes votes, and only about 6% of that actually went to infrastructure, which is a job of the federal government in the first place. It's denoted in the Constitution. But, you know, interestingly to me, we spent in one night almost as much money, maybe even more money, but almost as much money as we had spent in Iraq to that point. And what did we get for it? What did we get for it? We had a promise of unemployment staying low. It didn't. Look, I get it. I believe that the President, I believe my colleagues on the other side of the aisle really thought this was going to be the thing that worked. I really believe they believe that. but it didn't. History shows it didn't. History shows this didn't work. So are we going to really, honestly revisit the idea of more and more stimulus spending again?
Well, the gentleman, it brings up a good point. Just one instance of stimulus spending in my district where it's actually threatens jobs. And that was a program that came out of the BTOP grant program to try to provide broadband to unserved and underserved areas across this country, a noble purpose to try to make sure that we're connected to internet technologies that we need with high speed to make sure we're able to educate children in a competitive workforce. But unfortunately, the money that came out of the stimulus actually was used to duplicate services by the private sector. In some areas, they actually overbuilt 100% with government money services, fiber optic cable that was already in place by the private sector. Many of these companies are very small co-ops, telecoms, that can't afford to have somebody come in and undermine them with the free government money, trying to offer under-cost services. And yet that's exactly what happened in the stimulus bill. They were already providing the service, and yet the government came in and laid a line right next to the line that already existed in there. So that's what happened in the stimulus bill. Instead of creating jobs, it actually undermined our ability to build the private sector up. And I know the gentlelady from Alabama has been an incredible leader on this.
Well, I just was thinking, well, while we're talking about this, part of the President's criticism in this article that came out is about Republicans' approach to just slashing spending. And I mean, if any of us cannot recognize that we are spending well beyond our means, we have $17 trillion in debt in our fourth year with over $1 trillion deficit. My kids, Margaret and George, are the reason that I'm here, why I'm fighting for, is that generation that was going to carry this burden after we're all gone. And for us to not first admit that we have a problem as we move toward finding solutions and admitting that we are spending well beyond our means, that we do have to rein in spending, that we have to change the approach, that's when we see our economy improve. That's when we see hardworking American taxpaying families begin to be able to pick up and make that investment that you mentioned into the business so that they can be the job creators. So this is great that the President wants to talk about this again, because I see for my kids' future that this is how we're going to get this country back on track.
Well, it's a pleasure to join this conversation. I thank the gentlelady from Alabama for starting it. And we've heard this phrase for years now, pivot to jobs. And frankly, I'm new here. I've been here a little over 6 months, maybe 7 months. And I've been looking at it from the outside, and I haven't seen that pivot to jobs. And sometimes folks hear that phrase in Washington, D.C., and they think pivot to jobs. Well, what they really mean is pivot to government. And that's certainly what we've seen. Every time they think they're going to do something to help the job market, they pivot to more and more government. Remember when they passed the health care bill, it was suggested that this is going to be a job creator. Well, it really hasn't been. And we're talking to businesses, time and again, who are not hiring people. Had a great conversation with somebody in my district. A very tough conversation. And she was upset because her hours are being cut back because of the health care bill. And of course, we see this, across the country, not just in my district. And then we see more government as a proposal for more jobs. But we see the regulations coming out of this town that are hurting the jobs in my district. Just last week, we learned that some power plants are going to be closing in western Pennsylvania. These power plants are not in my district, but you know what? There are people who support those power plants by providing things to those power plants. You have jobs of truckers, of shippers, miners. More regulations coming out of this town by these federal elites doesn't help, jobs. I'm glad that we're going to pivot to jobs. I've talked about how you get jobs going in this country for quite a long time now. And I've stumbled down the 3 R's. You remember the 3 R's from going to school? Well, the 3 R's, I think, is number 1 R. The first R is repeal. Repeal Obamacare. You know, the administration acknowledged, I think, the problems with this bill by coming out with a unilateral action just a couple weeks ago saying, don't worry, big business, you don't have to comply for another year with the mandates here. But the everyday folks, you still have to comply. So this House last week took an action to provide some relief there. You know, we'll give the President the authority that he assumed unilaterally, but it needs to come from this House. That's called the rule of law. You know, that the President, we have, it's our authority to give that waiver. And so we passed a bill last week to say, you know what, take another year. And to the individuals, you know, who are going to be struggling it, give them the same break too. So number 1.
No, gentleman from Pennsylvania, I think you make some great points, and I just am reminded of the businesses that I've talked to in my district, from employers who are concerned they may have to reduce hours of their workforce, or employees who've already had their hours reduced. And I don't want to interrupt your comments, but I think you are pointing out how this is actually hurting the economy. So as the President pivots to jobs, perhaps he should pivot away from the bad policies that are driving this economy downward.
When you look at the regulatory framework that we have, you know, this House is soon to consider a bill known as the RAINS Act. It's a very simple bill. It basically says to the agencies that are staffed by bureaucrats, not by individuals who are elected, who are accountable. The people in this House are accountable. We stand for election every 2 years. We get a performance review every 2 years. You know, I tell the people in my district that I'm their employee. I'm the employee of about 705,000 people, and I get a performance review every couple of years. Well, you know, the regulators, we need a check and a balance on them. So there's a thing called the RAINS Act, very simple bill that says, look, if an agency puts out a regulation that's going to have an impact on this economy of $100 million or more, and as the gentleman from Colorado said earlier, the SBA, the Small Business Administration, has said that the cost of complying with all the regulations in our Federal Register is $1.8 trillion across the economy. The RAINS Act says if you have $100 million or more regulation that's going to go on the economy, it comes back to the Congress for a vote. We get to take accountability there. And so we get to assess whether the cost-benefit is going to be good for this economy and good for the American people. Otherwise, the out-of-control government is going to continue to choke our communities, our businesses, and what happens? Middle-class jobs are lost. Power plant workers, you can't replace jobs like that.
And the gentleman from Pennsylvania, I would just point out that this is not a radical Republican idea. The idea behind the RAINS Act is actually something that's embraced across many states in the country right now. In Colorado, we have what's called the Rule Review Bill. When an agency, whether it's the Department of Health, whether it's the Department of Agriculture, issues a new regulation, it actually comes to Congress for to the state legislature, excuse me, for a vote by the state legislature. The House, the state Senate, the state House, they get a vote up or down on whether or not that regulation is in the best interests of the people of Colorado, if it complies with the will of the legislature, and if the executive branch is carrying out in the right way. So the RAINS Act that you point out is not some crazy idea. It's actually something that's in use right now to protect our economy from overreach.
And let me add to that. I want to briefly remind people about the state of Illinois. I'm so proud of the people of the state of Illinois. I love my state. I've lived there most of my life, except my time in the military. And but let's look at that approach. That approach has been a regulatory approach. That's been a big government approach. In fact, you look at, again, the south part of Chicago, and you see people, I think it was like 9 people killed just this last week, and unreal. I mean, more than you will find killed in Afghanistan, and this is an American city. How's the best way to fix that? It's to pull people out of poverty. Illinois has a big government. Illinois has very generous stuff they give, but Illinois is not good lately at generating jobs. So has big government helped those people in a tough situation in South Chicago? No. You know what would help the people in South Chicago? Is an opportunity to go out, work hard, earn a living, and an opportunity to get ahead. That's what this is about. This is about how do we give everybody the opportunity that all of us speaking on the floor of the House of Representatives, who have all different backgrounds that we got, whether it was from our parents or from our education or from whatever it was, how do we ensure that we replicate that?
Yeah, the good news is that we can do that. You know, if we empower our communities, empower individuals, empower families, we can do that. The solutions are not inside this beltway. They're out there. And Washington needs to get out of the way so that people can take their own initiative and build those real economies out there. You know, the third R I talk about, you know, we got repeal Obamacare, replace it with common sense, patient-centered reform that gets care to people. RAINS Act, stop the over-regulating. And thirdly, reform. Reform our tax code. We have the highest corporate tax rate in the world, the highest business taxes in the world. You know, this is a world economy. 95% of the consumers in the world are outside our borders. We need to be competing for the world's capital to come here to invest in our communities. I was talking with a business in my district who is a subsidiary. They have a foreign owner, but they were trying to convince the foreign owner to invest in our country, which would be a good thing because that's going to mean more jobs. And the parent company said, well, you're just not competitive right now. Lost opportunity. Our corporate tax rate is 35%, and while do corporations really pay that? You know, our tax code is so riddled with loopholes and picking the winners and the losers, rather than having a competitive, fair playing field. You know, we have to move to have the most competitive tax system in the world.
I was speaking to a business in my district several months ago, and they had a conversation with somebody who isn't interested in reducing the burden on American families by making common sense out of our tax code, creating a flatter, fair tax system. And they were talking about this is a manufacturing business in Colorado, and they were talking about what their tax rate is, and that they have looked at every way, every provision, every code possible to try to figure out how to lower that rate, and they can't go any further. They're still in the mid-30s, lower 30s, and the response they got from this legislator was, well, then you just need to hire a new accountant. Instead of actually trying to get to a real reform of our tax code, to lower the rate, flatten the code, they actually were told, just get a new accountant because they're not doing the right job. That's not how we're going to create jobs in this country. And
I think the great point on that is, why do we want to lower the tax rate, right? Is it because we want to protect the 1%? I've heard that 1,000 times, right? And I'll be honest, I probably haven't been the best at coming back at that and explaining why we want a lower tax code and why we want a fair tax code for everybody, a tax that people pay what they need to pay to the government. They aren't overcharged, but then people aren't also allowed to get away with being undercharged. It's because on an individual level, you literally have mothers filling their vans up with gasoline, buying groceries, and not able to afford to feed their children because the government in some cases take a third of what these single mothers make. They just take it. And then we see people that can get away with all the loopholes in the system. They hire enough accountants and they don't pay that percent. So let's make it fair for everybody.
Yeah, but we got ourselves, I mean, in that trouble as far as the government goes.
Sure.
We can't point fingers at somebody that goes and you know, is smart and figures out how to make themselves. What we do is we fix the problem, which is the underlying code, by making it fairer and flatter. And I'll just say, we were saying earlier, Mr. Speaker, that we've been communicating tonight with our constituents at hashtag the #4 jobs. And just some of the things that I'm hearing go directly to this point. Josh from Troy says, throw out the tax code. I just want to highlight the people that we're hearing from, Mr. Speaker, are saying exactly what our frustrations are on this floor as the President tells us to pivot back to jobs in the economy. James from Dothan, Alabama says taking out Obamacare will help free employers to hire full-time employees which our economy really needs. Sarah from Dothan, health care is the biggest problem. Employers are afraid to hire until they know the whole deal. We've talked about that in your three R's, the repeal and the replace being the first, about this uncertainty, not just in the regulatory environment that businesses have to deal with, or with the tax code, which is the point you were all just making, but also in how these laws are going to be implemented. We passed these gargantuan bills. We don't know what's in them, and they get passed, and now the uncertainty associated. I mean, how many people have you guys talked to that have had to hire a new person just to come into compliance with what they think the health care law might be, instead of hiring another individual that can then produce what that company produces to provide a product for this country. Instead, they're having to compete with all of the federal employees that are put in place to implement these laws. Employers are having to go out and hire somebody just to come into compliance with the laws. And now I hear from our bankers back in our state, you guys have probably heard this one, that not only is the regulator showing up, but the regulator's now showing up with a lawyer as well. So the bank has to go get their lawyer there because they're not going to find themselves in a position to not be duly represented at a time when there's a federal regulator in their office. This is just costing businesses more and more dollars.
Well, and it's not just costing businesses. You know, you think, again, to the mom who's sitting at that kitchen
it's passed
table.
off to me, the consumer.
Exactly. Well, you think of the mom who no longer has the free checking. You know, they're going paying the monthly bills. You know, they're looking at that utility bill, the electric bills coming in. And remember when the president in 2008 said that electricity rates are necessarily going to skyrocket with his plan? Well, there's the mom who's going through the monthly bills, you know, wondering how she's going to make ends meet, and all of a sudden there's another $5 or $10 or whatever that the charge is going to be for losing the free checking. That's real money. And then she goes to the gas tank, and all of a sudden prices are going up at the gas tank again. Another $10 there. $10 for the checking, $10 for, oh, that's $20 right there, and it grows and it grows and it grows.
And then she goes to the grocery store and she sees that the cost of milk is higher because the cost of gasoline is. I mean, you know, I'm that mom that puts gas in her car and goes to the grocery store, and you can see the net effect that this has on the individuals. So you're absolutely right. It's not just the businesses, but the businesses then have to turn around and pass that cost off onto the consumer. We have solutions for these problems, real commonsensical solutions that we have put forth and put forth and put forth, reducing the regulatory environment, a health care solution that works, that allows for individuals to make those decisions between themselves and their doctor. You know, an all-of-the approach energy plan that is actually put into practice here in the House of Representatives instead of being that campaign rhetoric. We really have demonstrated our belief in our approach to an all-of-the-above energy plan. Speaking of energy,
how are you?
Thanks for joining us.
Oh, glad to be with you this evening. You know, I thought it was interesting that it was just raised the issue where the President said that costs would necessarily skyrocket. I actually carry that quote around in the back pocket, so I pulled it out, my little folded-up version here that I have, and what he said was, when I was asked earlier about the issue of coal, you know, under my plan of cap-and-trade system, electricity rates would necessarily skyrocket, even regardless of what I say about whether coal is good or bad, because I'm capping greenhouse gases. Coal power plants, you know, natural gas, you name it, whatever the plants were, whatever the industry was, they would have to retrofit their operations. That will cost money. And you know what he said next? Exactly what you've been talking about. They, talking about those plants that would have to retrofit, they will pass that money on to consumers. But it's not just a higher cost to the consumers, to the moms and the dads that are going out there shopping, trying to make ends meet, trying to look at their grocery bill getting bigger, their gas bill getting bigger, et cetera, but it's also the impact on the families. Because no matter what they say about, oh, we can do this with jobs and we can create jobs, that's not been the case, particularly in my district, which is a natural gas and coal-producing district. I was at a remote area medical program this weekend in my district. Senator Kane was there, and I was doing intake and helping folks get those documents filled out. And one of the things, one of the people that came through was talking to me, her husband. She was there herself. She needed some help. Her daughter needed some help. Her husband lost his job in the mine. This is happening all across my district, all through central Appalachia. They're laying off people. Every month we're losing more and more jobs. Now, mind you, a lot of folks don't know that these jobs are bringing in money to the community and that these are big paying jobs. Estimate is somewhere between $75,000 and $95,000 a year. That's what these jobs bring into the community. So here's a lady that needs help because they've lost their job because of the policies of the administration that have killed those jobs. But as the gentleman previously stated, it's not just the jobs in the coal mine. It's not just the coal operators. It's the people that sell the cars to the people who used to work in the mines. It's the people who sell the mine safety equipment to the people who run the mines and work in the mines. It's the people who haul the coal. It's the people who work for the train companies that haul the coal. And it's the cost of making goods in the United States of America where those costs are going up and up and up compared to other parts of the world. And in fact, there's an article just recently that says that Southeast Asia, even though natural gas is available to that Asian market, is choosing coal over and over again because per BTU it's better for them to use coal. And a lot of times people talk about the low cost of natural gas in this country, and I have to tell you it's a great boon to us in many, many fields, in lots of areas. But you have to remember, at $4 per million BTUs created, coal and natural gas are equal. Anything above $4, coal is more efficient. It's cheaper to use. But guess what? This year, we've been over $4. And right now, today, it's $3.83. But this year, we've been over $4. So what we're doing is we're passing these costs on. We're taking our jobs. We're shipping them overseas. And I know y'all have heard this before, but I want, Mr. Speaker, everybody in the country to know that we send these jobs overseas. They're making the goods that we used to make in this country. They're getting the money that we used to have in this country for our jobs, our employees. And according to a NASA study, it takes 10 days for the air from the middle of the Gobi Desert, that's in central China, to get to the eastern shore of my beloved Virginia. The air is coming back over here. So what we need to be doing is we need to be looking for things that resolve this issue of the pollutions and so forth on a global basis. And we don't need to be killing jobs in the United States of America while we look for those solutions. We need to make sure we're encouraging those jobs in the United States of America. And with that,
and wouldn't it be nice if, and that was very well said. Wouldn't it be nice if we could just all have conversations like that all the time? I mean, look, there are people that really believe that coal's bad. I disagree. I disagree vehemently. They believe it. And I'm sure my friend from Virginia would love to debate them respectfully. But I remember hearing rhetoric about our party supporting black lungs and, you know, and that rhetoric that's meant to fuel instability and anger and division. That's what's disappointing to me. Mr. Speaker, as I look to the President to try to lead this country, I want to look at a man who, of his past and who he is a very dynamic person. Came from some very tough circumstances to become President of the United States. I wish you would say that, you know what, my job is to lead this conversation about jobs and the economy. My job is to lead this conversation. Look, we tried stimulus spending. I really thought it would work, but it didn't. Some Republicans, why don't you come to the White House? Why don't you have a conversation with me? I haven't been invited to the White House in years. Why don't you come to the White House and let's have a conversation? Maybe we're not going to find any agreement, but at least we can respect each other's opinions and say, what do we need to do to get this economy back on track? Why is it that over 7% of our neighbors don't have jobs? Many more than that are underemployed in jobs they don't want. Why is that? What can we do to come together?
One of the things I think the gentleman brings up in tonight's conversation continues to talk about opportunity. and what we stand for and what we've been able to do for jobs. And I know that the gentlelady from Alabama is leading it. If you're interested in engaging in this conversation around the country, wherever you are, over the next several days, weeks, months, as we talk about the economy and beyond then, sending a tweet with the hashtag 4Jobs, the number 4 jobs, in terms of engaging in this conversation. But you talked about what we can do, and what we can do right now, the gentleman from Virginia knows very well, it is energy. We've talked to people about a manufacturing renaissance in this country. There are articles in the paper about businesses that were located in Germany that are looking to relocate into the United States. A company we talked to said the cost of energy in India is 4 times what they were paying here. Traveling to my district, the Niobrara Formation, Eastern Plains, Western Slope, the energy that we can create there that's allowing this to happen, whether it's coal, whether it's natural gas, whether it's renewable energy in my district. We have incredible opportunities to create these kinds of jobs that we know will put food on people's plates around the table, that will actually allow people to go on vacation, to afford gas to put in the car, to find a better way for their families. And so these are the kinds of jobs with this revolution that we can continue to foster. But we have to have a president that doesn't just pivot to jobs once in a while, but is committed to a long-term healthy economy that gets the regulatory mess out of the way, that provides certainty. Talk to a restaurant owner in my district. He owns 3 different bagel shops, and he's actually going to have to sell one of them, he's worried, because he doesn't know how he's going to be able to comply with the new health care plan. That's not the kind of certainty that we're looking for. So don't stop what's going good in this country, the manufacturing renaissance, energy development, opportunity, and let's fix what's not going great. Let's fix what's going wrong in this country.
I want to just share a few numbers with you. Since the President took office in January of 2009, the U6 unemployment rate has remained stuck at 14%. That's what workers that are stuck in part-time jobs, or they just have dropped out of the workforce altogether. And during that same time, we've watched, as I mentioned earlier, the national debt go from $9.8 trillion to $16.9 trillion. And according to Gallup, 17.3% of Americans consider themselves underemployed, which goes to your point. And so, and the President also promised 1 million new manufacturing jobs by the end of 2016, but factory employment has continued to fall in 2013. 4.3 million Americans have been out of work for 6 weeks or more, and 4.3 Americans, have been out of work for 6 weeks or more. The point is that we started this hour talking about the Washington Post article where the President came out and said that he's going to pivot back to jobs in the economy. And to the gentleman from Colorado's point, he should have never left the issue of jobs in the economy. And here in the House, our majority has been working tirelessly, as the gentleman from Illinois said, to bring the other side and say, look, we have these common sense solutions. This is about my kids and yours. This is about the future of this country. And we have an opportunity as leaders here in Washington representing all of the people that we do back home and a responsibility at that, to do all that we can to get the federal government out of the way so that people like your constituent back home in Colorado with the bagel stores can open another bagel store instead of having to worry about closing.
And let me just add really briefly to that. So you talk about our ideas and the fact that, look, the President can come, the RAINS Act, for instance, that makes sense, some of those things. I make a promise here today. If the President comes to the Republicans and says, give me some ideas, and we give him ideas, and he takes them, I will not go out and say that is a victory for Republicans. So let's get the partisanship out of this and say it's time to not be Republicans or Democrats about this. It's time to be Americans. Look, Mr. President, or Mr. Speaker, I would say that the President has made, in his mind, a valiant attempt to save the economy, and unfortunately, I hate to say it, it hasn't worked. So come to us. Let us give you some ideas. And if you adopt our ideas, I personally promise that I will not go out and say that the Republican Party just rolled the President or we just rolled the Democrats or anything like that. I will say America just won because we've worked together to get some big things done.
Well, and that's exactly at this time what this country needs. I'm working in a bipartisan fashion with a Democrat from Vermont, Peter Welch, on an energy efficiency measure. The President has also talked about this kind of approach, using performance contracts to create jobs, lower the amount of energy consumed by the United States government, the largest energy consumer in the country. But we do it without government mandates. We do it without government subsidies. But we're doing something that's going to create private sector jobs, save the taxpayer dollars, and use less energy at the federal level. And the President's doing this. We're doing this here. These are the kinds of opportunities we have to work together that are creating jobs. And they're not to bow down or to kowtow to a certain element of an agenda. It's actually to move the country forward by doing the right thing.
And I believe if we use our energy resources, which I believe can be a bipartisan issue and is in my part of the world, in central Appalachia, but if we use our energy resources, I am convinced that the United States of America can remain the #1 economic nation in the world well into the next century, recognizing we've just started this one, well into the next century, but we have to make sure that Washington doesn't get in the way and completely stop that economic engine.
Well, and I just want to thank all of my colleagues, Mr. Speaker, for joining us to talk about these important issues. And as we will hear from the President in his next 3 speeches about pivoting back to jobs and economy, we here in the House remain focused on jobs and the economy for all American families, but we are also pivoting and rather remaining focused on an all-of-the-above energy approach, repealing Obamacare so that I can make those decisions with my doctor about what's best for me, a fairer, simpler tax code that we know will help all Americans. We've got to ease burdensome regulations so that businesses can create more jobs instead of having to worry about the ones that they're going to lose. This is about making life work for Americans. This is about easing the pain that so many Americans are feeling because of this bloated government that refuses to first and foremost admit that we have a spending problem. This is about refocusing our efforts here in the House and making sure that we are remembering the people that sent us here, the families that we've talked about tonight, that we want to ensure that government is not hurting, but government is getting out of the way so that they can thrive in these United States of America. And with that, Mr. Speaker, we yield back. Thank you.
Gentlelady yields back the balance. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3rd, 2013, the gentleman from New York, Mr. Jeffries, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the minority leader.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous materials into the record on the subject of this special order.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my honor and my privilege once again to anchor this CBC special order, where for the next 60 minutes the members of the Congressional Black Caucus will have an opportunity to speak directly to the American people on the important issue of race in America. Where do we go from here? The events of the last several weeks have startled many throughout this country. Most recently, the verdict down in Florida where Mr. Zimmerman was acquitted in a result that shocked many all across this country, a verdict that was viewed by many as unjust. A few weeks prior to that, the Supreme Court struck down an important provision of the Voting Rights Act, an act that had been the most effective piece of civil rights legislation in this country, which has helped to bring our democracy to life and is designed to make sure that all Americans, regardless of race, have an opportunity to participate in our democracy in a meaningful way. The debate over the Farm Bill has left many people troubled by the fact that the SNAP program in an unprecedented fashion was left out. And if we don't come to an agreement here, our failure to step up and help those who are hungry will disproportionately have an impact on many in the African American community. These are just some of the recent events that have come together to put us in a position where, as the President recently indicated, it's time for us to have a meaningful conversation on race, a direct conversation, a forthright conversation, an honest conversation. And that's why the members of the Congressional Black Caucus are here today. We have made tremendous progress in America. We've come a long way in this great country. But we certainly still have a ways to go. The road to equality is still under construction. And we're here today to try and lay out a roadmap for how we can get closer to a more perfect union here in America. I'm pleased today that we've been joined by the chairwoman of the Congressional Black Caucus, the distinguished gentlelady from Ohio, who's been such a tremendous, eloquent, forceful leader in her position as chair of the CBC, and I now yield to her such time as she may consume.
I thank you so much, and I want to thank you, Congressman Jeffries, for leading the Congressional Black Caucus Special Order Hour on this very important topic tonight, a topic that has once again captured national attention and sparked dialogue in communities across this nation. On Friday, President Obama helped provide context to the emotion African Americans, and particularly African American men, have had around the tragedy of Trayvon Martin. Over the weekend, people of all ages and races gathered at federal government buildings in their cities to stand together to rise up for justice and in honor of Trayvon. To many, the verdict we all heard on Saturday, July 13th, was a miscarriage of justice, a consistent failure of our system that we've seen occur in this country one too many times. But tonight, I want to broaden this conversation on race and justice in America. I want to talk about how the emotion and discontent we are seeing from the African American community and people of other races in this country is about much more than the Zimmerman verdict. Much of the emotion we are seeing is in response to the continual attack on the rights and the closing of doors to opportunity for millions of individuals in this country. I'm not just talking about African Americans tonight. I'm talking about people who come from poor families who are trying to find their way out of a cycle of poverty. I'm talking about students who are doing all they can to pay for school, but who have to choose between being in the classroom or paying back loans that are becoming a source of profit for the government to help decrease the deficit. I'm talking about thousands of students from historically black colleges and universities who had to leave school because of changes to loans their parents took out to help them get an education. These changes were made without any consideration of how they would hurt these young people. I am talking about tonight, Mr. Speaker, immigrants of Hispanic, African, Asian, and European descent who are working in this nation but have no rights. I'm talking about people in communities across this nation who must now fight harder to have their voices heard in our democracy because others will use subversive and now permissible tactics that will make it harder to vote. And yes, to the Supreme Court of the United States, this is still a problem. You see, what we're experiencing and talking about right now is not just about Zimmerman. It's not just about race in America. It is about a system that should be just in creating and protecting the conditions for everyone to succeed. But instead, it continues to favor some over others. Since its inception in 1971, the Congressional Black Caucus has stood against injustice in our society so that inequity in treatment and opportunity under the law comes to an end, and so that all people are treated equal. Today, we continue that fight and ask America to join with us, not so that one group of any particular race can win, but so that in the end, we all win. Yield back.
Thank the distinguished chair of the CBC. Our objective here today, as part of our mission in the Congress, is really just to make sure that all Americans, regardless of skin color, have access to the American dream, have an opportunity to pursue life and liberty, and happiness here in America, unencumbered by any barriers connected to the color of their skin. That's our hope in America. That will make America all that it can be, this great country, even better in the quest toward a more perfect union. I'm pleased that we've been joined by the distinguished gentleman from New York, the Lion of Lenox Avenue, a legendary member of this great institution, Congressman Charles Rangel.
I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend. Let me thank my friend and colleague from the great borough of Brooklyn, City of New York, and my colleagues for coming down to the floor. When we started the Congressional Black Caucus in 1971, I guess most people say, why do you need a black caucus? 13 of you of color have been able to break the walls of racism and discrimination to reach the halls of the United States Congress. Obviously, you don't have to say that you're black. What we tried to do then, and I guess we are still involved in that struggle, is to try to make certain that there's absolutely no need for any group of people to have to identify themselves for protection and for aggressiveness on programs because of their color. I tell the gentleman from New York, I guess you were about born when we started the caucus. I wish by the time you got here and you were looking for the Congressional Black Caucus, and I would be able to say, HAKEEM, that's all over. That's when we were not treated as full Americans. That's ancient times. The same way I had thought that poll taxes and things of that nature that the late, my predecessor, Adam Clayton Powell, had been able to overcome. So now comes the question where people feel so awkward to say race was a factor in the killing of young Mr. Martin. Why would they feel so awkward? It is so easy to understand if two people have a problem. One was minding his business, the other was stalking him. One had a gun and the other ended up dead. And he had already described to the police who he was following, and it was a person of color. I don't think I've heard anyone challenge us if the colors were reversed. It wouldn't take all of the weeks, days and weeks that it took just to arrest somebody. And the reason that we're asking for the Justice Department to examine this is because the Justice Department has been successful in examining a whole lot of criminal activity where the local community somehow didn't see it. And George, as the family in Stanford calls him, obviously was a part of that family. I would think anybody would like somebody that's not a part of that family to go in and see what happened to Trayvon. But having said that, if you want to know where do we go from here, we don't have to explain why blacks are killing blacks. If we say that's an epidemic, if we say that's a sickness, if we say that's a disaster, I ask my fellow Americans, what the heck do you do when you find a disaster? I think one of the things you do is try to stop it from spreading and find out what do these areas have in common. First of all, why is it that members of the Congressional Black Caucus have more of these than other members in the Congress? We now want to talk about color. Color's not an issue, right? Right. But are we talking about the poorest communities that we have in the United States of America? Well, what's that got to do with it? Are we talking about communities that have the lousiest education system in the United States of America? Rangel, I don't see why you're bringing that up. Are we talking about sick people physically and where they have mental problems, they call them crazy instead of disoriented? Rangel, you're going way off now. Are we talking about legislation that actually, the investment of the United States, less money goes into these communities than communities of wealth? Listen, you put all this together, Rangel, that doesn't explain why people shoot each other. Well, I don't know why people shoot each other, but I know one thing: who doesn't shoot each other? Young kids that are inspired, they got education, they got families, they got a country that's the wind behind their wings, that want to make a contribution to this great country. They can walk anywhere, talk anywhere, and nobody's going to be following them talk about you look like someone that may hurt somebody. Now, we can't solve the problem unless we talk about it. And if you're talking about Hurricane Sandy, if you're talking about fires, you're talking about disasters, why can't we talk about this? This is costing America human beings. It's costing lives. It's costing money. It's costing us embarrassment. We're losing in terms of having stronger productivity. We're losing in terms of competition. It's not just the communities and their families that are losing. America's losing. The same way we would not hesitate to reach out to any village or any town or any state that has any type of an epidemic. So don't just look at the color. Look at the economic circumstances that's in the community that has it. And if you want, you might want to look up and see what member of Congress represent this. They say that sometimes we look to cut our districts. Well, take a look. We didn't look to cut our districts. Our districts looked for us to represent them. And the day we become colorblind is the day that the Constitution should say we walk out of this body. So our job here is to give this Congress sight. Color isn't a dirty word. It could be one of the most beautiful words that we have in the United States of America. Different colors, different cultures, different languages, different ways that we can enjoy being with each other, learning from each other. And so if we have a problem in Chicago, in Dallas, in Harlem, let's share that problem. And whenever there's a problem, any place in these great United States, that all of us can come together and try to bring people up so that this country doesn't have to take a back seat to anybody when it comes to saying, this is the land of the free, this is the home of the brave, and when you shoot someone down, you don't have to look at the color of the victim or the perpetrator. Justice shall reign, and discrimination in color shall not be a cause for lack of justice. Let me thank my gentleman from Brooklyn for giving us this opportunity. We've taken a death. I was with the family this weekend. The mother said she lost her son, but will dedicate her life to make certain she does all that she can so that no mother and father would lose their son. She didn't say black. She didn't say white. And the president said that you have to walk in his shoes. Anybody that's a father that loses a teenage son, the more that son looks like you, the more pain that you suffered. I'm about to take my seat, but I was just reminded when I went to Korea and we were going up the lines, we saw all kinds of dead people. South Koreans, Communist Korean, North Koreans, and our colleagues that were white soldiers that had died before we got there. But my colleague from Brooklyn, before we got up to the lines, 2 trucks, the Capfolios flew off them because of the speed that they were driving. And in those cars were black dead soldiers in our uniform, cross-length like they were logs on the way to grave registration. I don't have to tell you, we felt a lot different in looking at those people who looked exactly like us. I turn back, yield the balance of my time, and thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank the distinguished gentleman from New York for his very insightful, passionate, and wonderful remarks as it relates to the situation that we in America find ourselves in today, the way forward, as well as an understanding of why we've arrived in this position. Before I turn the floor over to the distinguished gentlelady from Texas, I just want to thank the congressman from Harlem for mentioning the fact that we here in America do have a capacity, I think, to address multiple problems at the same time. We can multitask. It's wrong when a child is killed in the inner city. It's wrong when a child is killed, 17 years old, walking home down in Sanford, Florida. And we have an ability to address all of these problems, but there's some in this country that criticize those of us who raise problems of injustice in America by immediately pointing out that in inner cities all across this country, in Brooklyn, in Harlem, in Houston, in Chicago, there's black-on-black violence. We understand that. It's our children who are dying. That's why the CBC this Friday will be in Chicago, convening a summit to discuss the problem of violence in the inner city communities in places like Chicago, Illinois. But that doesn't mean we turn a blind eye to injustices that exist in other parts of the system. We're pleased that we've been joined by the distinguished gentlelady from Houston, Texas, who has been working hard on this issue, on many issues of concern and injustice here in America. And so let me now yield to Representative Sheila Jackson Lee.
Let me thank the distinguished gentleman from New York, and let me thank our chairperson, the Honorable Marcia Fudge, and all of my colleagues that are on the floor tonight to accept the challenge that has been given over the airwaves by many people. I want to thank Mr. Jeffries for pointing out, as I stand here as a mother, would make the argument of a son, of a black son, I can affirm that any child's life is of great value. In fact, we spent the weekend in Houston reaffirming the value of a child's life. And I want to cite and compliment Bishop James Dixon and Pastor Kirby John Caldwell, Pastor Henderson and Nash, and Lawson, and many other pastors that were there who obviously joined with so many, including my colleague who's here on the floor of the House, Congressman Al Green, and I heard nothing but an affirmation of the value of life. And I'm delighted as a lawyer and as a legislator that you reaffirm that African Americans do not coddle crime of any kind. A crime that happens to be between two African Americans or, in essence, two Caucasians. It is noted, if my facts are correct, that 84% of the crimes of those perpetrated on white Americans are done by white Americans. 86% of the crimes done on black persons, black Americans, are done by black people. It might be that it speaks again to the isolated, segregated neighborhoods that we travel in. But the one thing, Mr. Speaker, that is unique, you can count the fact that those African Americans that perpetrated crimes are incarcerated over and over again at a higher number than any other population in this nation. There lies the premise of much of what we are discussing tonight, and I would hope that as I finish, that it will also be a pleading that we have a discussion on race. Let me just cite these numbers since I started out with the idea of incarceration. Incarceration is not an equal opportunity punishment. For example, incarceration rates in the United States by race were as follows: 2,468 per 100,000 are black, 1,038 per 100,000 Latinos, 409 per 100,000 are whites. The United States locks its black males at a rate 5.8 times higher than what previously has been known as one of the more racist countries in the world, that is South Africa. Under apartheid in 1993, black males were only 851 per 100,000. In 2006, black males are 4,789. I would say to my colleagues and to the Speaker and to my colleagues here, what are we to think when the scales of justice or even unequally balanced. And as my friends have said, the pain that we felt at the loss of Trayvon Martin and the simplicity of an arrest, and then ultimately in a Sanford jury, a state trial that we could not even find with much evidence to prove that there was not enough commonality of cultural connection that they could not see that something should have valued the loss of an innocent child who simply was walking to get home. Maybe it is the words of Frederick Douglass that says, that he said on April 16, 1883, "It is a real calamity in this country for any man, guilty or not guilty, to be accused of a crime." We all are upset when that happens, guilty or not guilty, perpetrator or not. But it is an incomparably greater calamity for any colored man to be so accused. Justice is often painted with bandaged eyes. She is described in forensic eloquence as utterly blind to wealth or poverty, high or low, white or black. But a mass of iron, however thick, could never blind American justice when a black man happens to be on trial. I would say to my colleagues that that is something that we have to move beyond in America. In an E.J. Dionne article, he said the dignity and grace of Trayvon Martin's family should inspire all of us to keep our eyes on the future. We should not blind ourselves either to the persistence of racism or to our triumphs in pushing it back. It does not help when those who are not like those of us who are on the floor, members of the Congressional Black Caucus, want to push back and call those of us who raise questions of justice, which, by the way, if you impact and correct the criminal justice system, you're going to impact whites, Latinos, you're going to impact African Americans. If you address the question of mandatory minimums, if you address the question of rehabilitation funding, if you address the question of providing housing and opportunity for work for those who've come out of prison, no matter where they've come out, the federal system or, in fact, the state system, you make it better for all. But every time we raise the question of improving issues of justice, we get called or get labeled as being racist. So I want to say to America and to our friends, can we not be called Americans? Because that is what the Congressional Black Caucus stands for. In 1997, John Hope Franklin finished a report that called itself One America in the 21st Century, Forging a New Future. I read one sentence. America's greatest promise in the 21st century, which we're in right now, lies in our ability to harness the strength of our racial diversity. We have not done that. And that is why the Congressional Black Caucus is here on the floor of the House, to be able to accept the challenge that the President made as he indicated to America unabashedly and without fear. It's not only that Trayvon may have been my son, but he may have been me. And the President says something very powerful. He said that we must, all of us, members of Congress and governors and pastors and plain civilians and young people, must do some soul searching. And we must, as families and churches and workplaces, find the possibility of being a little bit more honest. And at least ask yourself your own questions. Am I wringing as much bias out of myself as I can? Am I judging people as much as I can based on not of the color of their skin, but the content of their character? That, I would think, be an appropriate exercise in the wake of this tragedy. So tonight, Mr. Speaker, and in joining with my colleagues, I'm going to stand unabashedly and ask for that kind of discussion. I want those who were standing on the street corners yesterday in Houston, Texas, shouting out that people were racist because they were concerned about a court decision that they didn't think was fair. I am concerned that all of those people who were marching would be labeled across America, in all the cities that they were, peacefully, without arrest or incident, would be called un-American. That's where we have to wring, if you will, our souls and find that we take from it the bias that we might perceive to be blocking us from understanding the richness of our diversity. And so I would argue that we are blessed because we have Asians, blessed because we have white people, blessed because we have Latinos, blessed because we have African Americans, blessed because of the diversity in sexual orientation, blessed because we have people who are short, tall, blessed because we have people who are wealthy and middle class, and blessed because we can work on those who are impoverished as a Congress, and we can stop the devastation of the SNAP and provide those individuals who are impoverished to do better. Finally, let me say this. This past week, we honored an icon that moved me because of the diversity of those who are honoring. From Senator Cornyn from my state and Senator McConnell, organized by Maxine Waters and Eric Cantor, the Speaker of the House, Senator Durbin, and on and on and on, Leader Pelosi and Clyburn and Hoyer, and I'm sure I've missed many others, our chairwoman and Eleanor Holmes Norton. What a vast diversity of individuals who rose to honor Madiba, Nelson Mandela. And Nelson Mandela said something that should be potent as we look to fix the inequity of self-defense laws, as many of us look at racial profiling, which exists extensively in this country, as evidenced by the heinous crime that generated the hate crimes legislation in our state of Texas, the killing of Jasper Byrd, an individual who was dismembered, who was an African-American male, minding his business, walking along a lonely rural road. Or the man that was killed in Mississippi, who just came to a hotel and went out to his car and was killed tragically just because of who he was. The numbers of cases that we've had that impact that we have not yet understood the greatness of America. So we've got to change stand your ground laws. I intend to introduce that legislation this week. And I look for bipartisan support because, as Senator McCain said, maybe we need to look to review federally what stand your ground laws are doing, not the castle laws, but the extension of those that then carries this power out into the public where you do not have to retreat. But I read these words of Mandela. It says, our struggle has reached a decisive moment. We call on people to be able to intensify the struggle on all fronts. But he had another quote that I'd like to reach. And he said that honor comes when you pursue and are determined in your struggle. And he mentioned the fact that even with humiliation, even with insults, and even with defeats, if you continue in your struggle, then there is honor due. Let me thank Mr. Jeffries for laying out the opportunity for the Congressional Black Caucus to answer the question, the road to equality is under construction. And let me thank him for allowing us to rise to the floor. I go to my seat by saying, equality will come when school districts like North Forest Independent School District will not be destroyed and closed in Houston, Texas, when we raise up education. Equality will come when we focus on ridding this nation of poverty by making sure that we have the kind of economic programs. And equality will come when we recognize that justice should roll down on all of us and that we address the question of criminalization of African-American males and others so that justice is equally applied, but as the individuals return and have done their time, that they will come to a place that is welcoming so that they can serve their nation. For that reason, I yield back my time with the great hope of the same message that came in the treatise by John Hope Franklin that he chaired the Committee on Race and said America's greatest promise is in her diversity. I call upon my colleagues, my friends in Texas, my friends in my district, let's sit down at the table of harmony. Let's talk about race as we embrace each other and love each other, because that's what America is all about. Thank you to the Congressional Black Caucus for its vision and its leadership. I yield back.
Thank the distinguished gentlelady from Texas for a very thoughtful